have some great some great articles for you to read and ponder. So please take a moment and join the Energy Team newsletter. Okay. Some upcoming team events, some upcoming webinars. In June, this is a big topic for us, merchant generator and community solar leasing. We are seeing this happen all over the state. These are smaller lease amounts, 20 to 60 acres. And you can see that link right there. We're going to have an attorney who reviews these leases along with myself to talk about what are these things, why are they here, and what you might do about them as a landowner approach for a lease option. Okay. We're also going to have our friends and colleagues talk about sea change and the anaerobic digestion question and answer session. This is a great session for those of you who are interested in this and want to learn more, right? But today's presentation is landowner role in orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells. Once again, we have with us our friends Derald Shuffstall. He's assistant counsel for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. Amanda Veazey, she is the vice president for CSR services, along with myself, Dan Brockett, and our team, Jon Laughner. So thank you for joining us. Let me stop and introduce our guest here. Pardon me one moment. So Bud Shuffstall is a 1991 graduate of Allegheny College and a 1994 graduate of the University of Pittsburgh Law School. An attorney with DEP since 2022, Bud currently advises various programs throughout Northwest Pennsylvania, including Armstrong, Butler, Clarion, Crawford, Erie, Elk, Forest, Indiana, Jefferson, Lawrence, McKean, Mercer, Venango, and Warren counties. That's a lot, Bud. But before joining DEP, Bud had a lot of professional experience spanning across several decades, and he worked a lot with oil and gas matters as an attorney in private practice through these same counties, including representing landowners in oil and gas matters. He's a lifelong resident of Northwest Pennsylvania and currently lives in Meadville, Pennsylvania with his wife, Sherry, and enjoys all forms of outdoor recreation. Then we also have Amanda Veazey. She is a geologist with more than 25 years of experience in oil and gas and environmental industries. Amanda is passionate about the intersection of energy, environment, and people. And as vice president of CSR Services, LLC, Amanda works with stakeholders, including landowners, communities, and regulators to plug orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells across the eastern United States while restoring the environment. She's held positions with Seneca Resources Company, LLC, Marathon Oil Company, and ERM. Amanda earned a bachelor's in geology from Smith College and a master's in geology and geophysics from Louisiana State University. Amanda and her husband, Matthew, live in Pittsburgh, so we are quite pleased to have them. We always bring in people who are smarter than me, right? So glad to have that today. But if I could let you go first, if you can go ahead and share your slides and take yourself off mute. Thanks for coming.
I'm glad you reminded me to take myself off mute. Can you see my slideshow there? How about now? How's that?
Yes.
Okay, we've got the technical issues resolved. That's good. Well, thanks, Dan, for that introduction. Appreciate it. I've done this with Dan for a few years before I joined DEP on other topics of interest to landowners throughout Northwest Pennsylvania, as he mentioned. I'm going to give a high-level view of some of these issues. As you can imagine, we could get off in the weeds talking about specifics, and I know Dan has some specific examples, and Jon, they'll talk about some specific examples that may be more horror stories. But my job is to kind of give a view of what the law says and requires of various parties, including landowners in Pennsylvania. There's my contact information will be available in the presentation. I think it's important to start with a look at the history of well plugging in Pennsylvania, as you can see from this slide. And as has already been pointed out in the chat section, the valley that changed the world, the first well was drilled, Drake's Well, in August of 1859. It's interesting to note, though, that from a regulatory standpoint, there were no regulatory agencies in place at that time. It wasn't until 1901 that the Department of Forests was created. So there were no plugging requirements of any sort for the next 19 years. And as many of us living and growing up in Northwest Pennsylvania know, or if you've ever been to the museum in Titusville and seen the photography on display there, there were a lot of oil and gas wells drilled in Pennsylvania during that time period. The first commercial gas well in Pennsylvania was drilled in 1872 in Oil Creek Township. So a lot of wells drilled before the Department of Forest was even created. And, there were a few plugging requirements for the first 19 years. There were none. And then after that, there were a few. But that process evolved too. And we didn't really get into modern well plugging until well into the 19th century. So there was, basically no plugging requirements for the first 19 years, no regulatory agency for the next 42 years, no well permitting requirements for 97 years. DER, the predecessor for DEP, wasn't created until 111 years after the first well was drilled. The first well plugged in DER's plugging program happened 130 years after the first oil well was drilled. And DEP doesn't even come into existence for 136 years after the first oil well was drilled. So from a regulatory standpoint, you can say that we've sort of been playing catch up since 1859. Against that backdrop, I want to give a little plug for DEP's website, and I will confess that much of the information from my presentation today came from these sources. Excellent resources for landowners. The links will appear hopefully in the program materials. But if not, you can get to all of these resources on DEP's website. The exception would be the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources oil and gas page. That will be a separate website. But again, some excellent materials on DEP's well plugging program. There's a mapping tool. And I know Dan and Jon will talk more about some of these too and give some demonstrations. But again, just a little plug for our site, because there is a wealth of information there. There's an abandoned orphaned well web report viewer, and there's this landowner information page that is an excellent resource that would be a good starting point for folks wanting more information. Now, two more resources again that you'll find on our website: this abandoned and orphaned oil and gas well, and the DEP well plugging program link, and Plugging Pennsylvania's Abandoned Oil and Gas Wells by Tom Decker. This is also an excellent resource, and one of the two starting points that I would refer any landowner with questions about this process as a good starting point. Tom did a heck of a job, and it's a very good comprehensive article. But the purpose of putting these links on this page was not just to list more excellent resources. It really was to highlight the use of three different terms that are terms that we're going to hear and need to have at least a basic understanding of and definition for. You'll see the caption, or the title of the slide is Orphaned, Abandoned, or Legacy. And that talks about we're trying to describe the type of wells that might appear on your property, that might exist there. There may be abandoned wells. Some of those abandoned wells may be orphaned wells. Some of those abandoned wells may be legacy wells. And what's the difference between them? Let's not forget too, I tend to talk about oil wells in some areas of Pennsylvania, and then I tend to switch in my mind thinking about gas wells in other parts of Pennsylvania, but we're talking really about both. Okay, Bud, what's the difference between an orphaned, abandoned, or legacy well? Well, let's go through the definitions. The statute tells us, Pennsylvania's Oil and Gas Act tells us that an abandoned well is defined as any well that has not been used to produce, extract, or inject any gas, petroleum, or other liquid within the preceding 12 months, or Any well for which the necessary equipment for production, extraction, or injection has been removed, or any well considered dry, not equipped for production within 60 days after drilling, redrilling, or deepening. So an abandoned well, as you can see, hasn't been used for 12 months or doesn't have the necessary equipment for production, or it's been drilled or redrilled or deepened and considered dry and not equipped for production. But as you can also see, some of these abandoned wells could be very old. They could be 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years old. Some of them may be new. Some of them could be, maybe 3 months old. The producer drilled a dry hole and is never going to produce, and that's an abandoned well too. Orphan wells are a subset of abandoned wells. So an orphan well is defined by the Oil and Gas Act as a well abandoned prior to a specific date, April 18, 1985, when the well has also not been affected or operated by the present owner or operator, and from which the present owner, operator, or lessee has received no economic benefit. And then there's this other language that we'll talk about later in the context of landowner exceptions to well plugging liability. And this is another exception, other than as a landowner or recipient of a royalty interest from the well. It's just one of the first landowner or royalty owner exceptions that we're going to see. So an orphan well is a well abandoned prior to April 18, 1985 that hasn't been operated by the present owner or operator, and from which they've received no economic benefit. So what's a legacy well? The term legacy well is generally used to describe a well which was drilled and abandoned historically, and for which there is no current responsible party. Again, legacy well is another subset of abandoned wells. These are, as you can imagine, these are older wells. We have no information about who drilled them when, and they've been abandoned for a very long time. As you can see, there's a lot of confusion about the interplay and the interchange of the definitions of abandoned and orphaned and legacy wells. I'm going to continue to talk about abandoned wells from this point forward, simply because the Oil and Gas Act uses that term in most instances when it's talking about well plugging obligations. This slide talks about a summary of landowner potential liability. And these are the issues that landowners want to know about and be aware of as they consider these issues if they find or suspect they may have an abandoned well on their property. We'll talk more about each of these in depth, but generally, landowners have a duty to report abandoned oil and gas wells on their property. There's a statute in Pennsylvania that requires that. As I mentioned earlier, there is this landowner exception to the general obligation of well owners to plug oil and gas wells. We're going to talk about the landowner exception to well plugging liability. We're going to talk about how landowners can avoid inadvertently becoming liable for the costs associated with plugging a well. And I know Dan and Jon are going to touch on some of these subjects too, but these things bear repeating, and we'll kind of approach that from all angles. And I'm also going to talk about home use well owners and why there's a unique opportunity for them now. So, the landowner duty to report to DEP. A well owner, well operator, or other person discovering an abandoned well on property purchased or leased by the well owner, well operator, or other person. So, in our case today relevant to our discussion, a landowner who discovers an abandoned well on their property shall identify it to the department within 60 days of discovery and advise the department that he or she is seeking classification of the well as an orphan well. I outlined some potential criminal liability there, summary offense for unintentional violations. Think of a summary offense as a traffic ticket. If it's intentional, it can have increased penalties, including the possibility of jail time, and then there are potential civil penalties. I can tell you that, I know I haven't been with the department long, but I haven't seen an instance where the department has imposed any of these penalties on individuals who are not well owners or operators, in other words, engaged in the business of producing oil and gas wells. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but if it has, I'm not familiar with it. But the statute is on the books and imposes that liability. But generally speaking, who's liable for plugging a well? Those are operators and owners. And those are two different classifications that we need to talk about. Operators, as you can imagine, the operator is the person designated as the operator or well operator on the permit application or the well registration. Modern wells have these designations, have these permits, and identify the operator, whether it's an individual or a company. However, if a permit or well registration was not issued for the well, then the operator is defined as a person who locates, drills, operates, alters, or plugs a well or reconditions a well with the purpose of production from the well. Now we're going to talk about owners, because a lot of landowners are concerned that they may have potential well plugging liability because they own the land on which this abandoned well is located. And it's interesting to note we're going to talk about owners, and then we'll talk about the landowner liability exception. An owner is defined as a person who owns, manages, leases, controls, or possesses a well or coal property. And then we see right away that the term does not apply to orphan wells, except where DEP determines that a prior owner or operator benefited from the well. So orphan wells, again, going back to our definition of orphan wells, wells abandoned prior to April 18, 1985, for which no person or entity is identifiable as responsible for the well. An owner of a well abandoned before April 18, 1985 that hasn't been produced is not considered an owner liable for the cost of plugging that well. That's as clear as mud for the landowner. So let's talk about the statutory landowner liability exception that's much clearer, in my opinion. The Oil and Gas Act says that for purposes of the act, the term owner does not include the owner or possessor of surface real property on which an abandoned well is located, who did not participate or incur costs in and had no right of control over the drilling or extraction operation of the abandoned well. So you find the hole in the ground. I know Dan and Jon have examples of what that might look like. And you've never had anything to do with it. You certainly didn't produce oil or gas from it. You didn't even know it was there. This section says you're not considered to be an owner of that well for purposes of the Oil and Gas Act and well plugging liability. That's not to say, though, that landowners can't do some things to trigger liability that they otherwise wouldn't have. So what am I talking about here? Well, having represented landowners before, I know folks who were proud of the fact that they were able to plumb in their tap into the gas well themselves with no help. Farmers that I represented could rewire their barns and their homes without an electrician. They certainly could lay some pipe and make some connections. Doing that sort of thing, hooking that well up to your grain dryer blower in your barn, producing the well, receiving economic benefit from the well, that's a problem. That can subject you to potential liability under the law. Then you become an owner or perhaps an operator. There are some other careless things that you can do that may seem harmless to the average landowner, but could be very dangerous. I know Dan and Jon are going to talk about some of these things as well and give specific examples. But knocking over the wellhead and plowing it under or burying it isn't the answer, and in some cases that could possibly subject you to liability. There could be a situation where a deed has a well directly associated with it, where the wells were specifically transferred to you or to your predecessor in title. That's not a common situation, but it has happened in parts of Northwest Pennsylvania. A more common situation may be where a landowner was receiving free gas from an oil and gas lease, and the operator decided not to produce the well anymore and actually deeded the well to the landowner. We call those home use wells. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in all cases, DEP tries to work with the parties to achieve an equitable result. This is the free gas discussion. Historically in Northwest Pennsylvania, landowners like to negotiate a free gas provision in their oil and gas lease, whereby they would obtain the right to a certain level of production from the gas for their use in their homes or businesses or farms. And there was an economic benefit associated with that. That in and of itself, getting the right to free gas under an oil and gas lease does not subject the landowner or the royalty owner to liability for plugging the well. Okay. But if the producer decides to stop producing and deeds the homeowner the well, and the homeowner accepts that well, then the homeowner acquires the well plugging liability associated with that well. DEP estimates the average cost of plugging one well to be around $33,000, but those costs can easily escalate into the six-figure range depending on where the well is, how deep it is, and whether or not there are complications arising from the plugging operation itself. So free gas isn't free. If you're offered a deed to the well from the oil and gas company, understand that you would be accepting not just the right to produce and receive the gas from the well, but you're also agreeing to accept that well plugging liability at the tail end. So for those folks who may have a home use well, and there are lots of them in Northwest Pennsylvania, they may own the well. As I mentioned, they may have gotten a deed from the oil and gas company, or they may have just tapped into it or reworked the well, or more likely as time passes, somebody in their chain of title, their predecessors, may have done that. They may not even be aware that that's what happened. They may be tempted to just try to fly under the radar and remain anonymous. If they do that, they risk the penalties for not reporting that we talked about earlier, and they risk bearing the future well plugging costs. There is a grant program that is just now, I'll say, coming out, because there's information that's becoming, more information is becoming available every day about it. It's called the MERP, MERP grant program. MERP stands for Methane Emission Reduction Program. I'll say it's an emerging program. Stay tuned, check back on DEP's website, check back on Penn State Extension's website, because more information is going to be forthcoming and appears there every day. But generally speaking, home use well owners can apply. They can apply for the costs of plugging that well that they might otherwise be responsible for. It's an incentive to report, and it's an incentive to apply for that grant. I will say that if you're a home use well owner that's interested in this, you may want to explore and get more information about qualified well pluggers or other third parties who can actually perform or manage the work of plugging the well, because they're in that business, they know it, they understand it, and they're going to be participating in this program, maybe for themselves and certainly for other similarly situated landowners. Historically, this is the best time to come forward. If you look at that timeline that I shared early on, there has not been anything like this grant program in the last 136 plus years, however long it's been. There's not been an opportunity like this for landowners who have these wells on their property, who potentially could face some liability for the well plugging costs. These types of wells, these home use well owner wells, typically score high on DEP's well plugging priorities list. What do I mean by that? DEP wants to plug these wells when there is potential risk associated with them, whether it's methane migration into water supplies or safety hazards and risks to individuals, to health and human safety, or to the environment. But bottom line is you can't get a grant if you don't apply, and we don't know, we're still learning, I guess, how the limited funds will be prioritized and allocated, but I would suggest that earlier is better in terms of inquiring and applying. I can say this, and then I'll turn it over to Dan, I guess, and he'll talk more about this too. But I will say that if I were still in private practice, and many of you may remember me or know me from having represented landowners in Northwest Pennsylvania, I would be telling all of my landowner clients about this program and suggesting and recommending that they learn more, that they contact third parties familiar with well plugging programs, and consider applying if they qualify for that grant. Having said that, I think that's my time, and I'll turn it over to our next speaker. And thank you very much. And if I can get the
all right
step here.
Yeah, if you can stop share, Bud. Amanda, if you can go ahead and put
Oh, to Amanda. There you go.
There you go.
Yep. Just a moment. Yep.
Okay. I would ask everyone to put their questions in our Q&A. It's a lot easier for us to track what's been asked and what's been answered. So that would be great. All right.
All right, Dan, can you guys see that?
Yes, we can, but you're not in presenter mode yet.
Okay. Yep.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dan and Penn State Extension, for the invitation to present today. I was asked to give an overview of what it's like to plug an oil and gas well. And as Dan mentioned, I am with CSR Services, and we are considered to be a qualified well plugger. We are an oil and gas well servicing company based in Crawford County, and we have over 40 employees, most of whom live in the Northwest Pennsylvania region. We do all kinds of things, from servicing wells, cleaning them out, logging them, plugging them, and we also do roustabout services, which means that anything on the surface having to do with oil and gas wells, whether it's tanks or pipes, we have the crews who are able and willing to work with that equipment. We've been in existence since 2019, but our leadership has decades of oil field experience. So we've seen a lot of wells, we've plugged a lot of wells. So what I wanted to talk to you guys today about was the well plugging process, and there are 4 major steps in that. And we can go into details about any one of these. I just wanted to provide a high-level overview today of the process. There are 4 steps, like I mentioned: identification, project planning, the actual plugging itself, and then site restoration after the fact. So the first step, obviously, is identifying wells to plug. And how do we go about identifying abandoned oil and gas wells? There's a number of different ways to go about it. Looking at old maps, because the Northwest Pennsylvania region is rich in oil history. There's a lot of maps out there. There's a lot of historical information. There's also historic knowledge with properties being handed down from generation to generation. There's a lot of that family knowledge of activities that had happened on their properties. You might also find pipes or wells sticking up from the ground. Sometimes they're above ground storage tanks. Or if you don't see any surface expression, you might use some of your other senses to observe and maybe guess that there's something going on, so that there's a muskier gas kind of odor a hissing sound, oil or water draining from pipes that aren't connected to anything obvious. Or sometimes if you see bubbles coming up in fluid in a pipe or in a creek, those could be signs of abandoned oil and gas wells in the area. And the next couple of slides are just some pictures that I have taken out in the field when looking for abandoned oil and gas wells. And they really could look like anything. You could find, pump jacks in the middle of the forest. You could find wells in the middle of a field. On the left-hand side, this is a well that is on the escarpment at Lake Erie, in a property in Erie County. So it's just to the right of that tree in a little crater there. And then on the right-hand side, that is an open well in Lawrence County. It's an oil and gas well about 200 yards from Neshannock Creek. And during the summer, during high precipitation events, that well will actually flow water out of it. In low periods, oil will accumulate on the top of it. But the wellhead has been completely cut off. The casing's been sheared back, and it is just an open hole in the ground. These are a couple other oil wells where you'll see different equipment sticking up out of them. They could be open, they could be closed. There's just all different kinds of possibilities for encountering orphan gas wells or abandoned oil and gas wells. But I also want to mention that not all wells are in the woods. These are two wells that I have worked on. The one on the left is just off of somebody's front porch in Cleveland, Ohio. And I've encountered many wells in Erie as well, right in residential neighborhoods. And the well on the right-hand side is, that's a vent pipe sticking up out of a well that is 10 feet from a trailer in a trailer park in Erie. So just because they're oil and gas wells doesn't mean that they're all in rural locations. They can be in suburban locations as well. So as far as the identification process goes, I just wanted to make a couple of points about what landowners should and shouldn't do. Take photos from a distance. Stay 10 feet away from it. Try to take pictures from all four sides. Stay upwind from the well. And if you can get a GPS location, that is really very helpful for the next steps in the process. The more information a DEP inspector or a qualified well plugger has about where the well is located and hints and tips and tricks on how to actually get there, the better it is. So noting nearby landmarks, if you can flag the location and a path to the well using that flagger's tape, that's fantastic. Take notes. What do you observe? What sounds, smells do you observe? Are there pipes or tanks around? And contact the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And Bud had mentioned some information about that earlier. Don't touch anything. So you may be tempted to poke around and look at things. Don't touch the well. Don't throw anything into the well if it's an open pipe in the ground. Obviously, don't smoke or light anything near the well. And don't stand directly over it. And the reason that I say that is if it is venting gas, it could be methane, it could be hydrogen sulfide. You just want to be careful around that well. So then what happens next? Once DEP is notified, they'll contact the property owner to do an inspection. DEP will go and do historical record search to see if there's any information about it. As Bud mentioned, there is the state's orphan and abandoned well inventory, so that well will be checked against previous records. And as Bud mentioned, DEP prioritizes wells for plugging based on multiple factors, including threats to human health and safety and environmental damage. So DEP will then develop groups of wells to be plugged by contractors, but there is grant funding available, and we'll talk about that separately, for landowners, nonprofits, and contractors to plug wells on behalf of landowners. So that whole entire process for identifying wells can take weeks to months, but it's important just to get that process started. So once a well has been identified for plugging, there's quite a bit of planning that goes into the actual work before anybody ever shows up to do anything. So once a well has been identified, there is planning that needs to be done for work on the surface. So there are lots of conversations between the regulator and the contractor and the landowner, talking about where is the well, what's the smallest footprint that we as well pluggers need for all of our equipment that we're bringing into a location to plug the well. How do we actually get equipment into that location? So if that well is in a field, what's the best way to get to that particular well? Is it along a fence line? Can we go straight across the middle of the field? We work with landowners all the time on these kinds of considerations, and I'll show some examples of some of the equipment that we use and how we actually get from point A to point B. Another consideration is, do we have to cross multiple properties to get there? Is the easiest way to cross your neighbor's property rather than taking a longer route around on your own property? So like I said, there are a lot of conversations that are held with surface landowners in order to make sure that the plugging project is done the most efficiently as possible and impacts the fewest amount of acres possible. So are there environmental considerations? Obviously we're interested in not impacting planting and harvesting. We want to watch out for wetlands. There are tree cutting considerations, and obviously we want to be mindful of livestock that are in the area. We also have lengthy conversations with landowners about site restoration plan. So what happens after the well is plugged and all of the equipment goes away? What does your land look like after the fact? So there will be a plan written out, and everybody will agree to it. And then, there has to be regulatory approval for plugging. So that's when DEP gets involved and understands what the work plan is. In addition to that surface planning, there's subsurface planning that doesn't necessarily involve the landowner, but I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that there's quite a bit of engineering that goes into plugging a well. So we have to understand how the well was constructed. And a lot of times I liken well plugging to doing a kitchen restoration project. You can have that estimate from your contractor as to what it's going to take to redo your kitchen or redo your bathroom, but you're really only guessing as to what that plumbing looks like behind the wall, and you're really only guessing as to what that electrical system looks like behind that wall. You really don't know what that job is going to entail until you open up that wall. Similarly, sometimes we don't know what's going to happen with the well until we actually get in there. So we make all kinds of estimates on what we think what the well's design is, and what we think it will take to plug the well. But oftentimes we are changing plans as we go. But we always start with a plan. So we make an estimate on how the well was constructed, what fluids are in the wells, has the well been previously plugged, what kinds of things might we encounter. The planning process generally takes weeks to do. So it's not something that, we say, okay, we're coming in tomorrow to plug a well with absolutely no planning. There's quite a bit of planning involved. What I wanted to show was part of our surface planning aspect is really taking a look at the footprint that we will need for our equipment. So it's more than just a rig that shows up. We need tanks for water. We need storage space for our pipes. We need a trailer for all of our tools. We need a portable toilet. So we have a footprint that we're looking at. So on the left-hand side, this is an aerial photo of a recent project that we've been working on, where the well is at where the red star is, and this is at a lumber yard. So we had to work with the landowner to try to figure out how to get into the well, and it actually turned out that the neighbor had the easier access into the well. So the driveway that's coming in from the lower right-hand side up along those barns to the red star, that's actually a neighboring property. So we were able to work out an access agreement with the neighbor. And on the right-hand side, that is our hand drawing that we worked with the surface landowner to say, okay, this is the space that we need, and these are our pieces of equipment. How can we best fit this in and not disturb your property too much? So as I mentioned, a lot of thought and effort goes into subsurface planning. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how the well was constructed. So on the left-hand side, that's just a well schematic showing all the different telescoping casings that go from the surface down into a producing formation. We're also concerned about the well's condition itself. So a lot of wells that are older have pipe that's corroded and may have equipment either still suspended in the well or has fallen all the way down to the bottom. And so we need to take that kind of information into account to help us plan, what equipment to bring, what tools we might need in order to retrieve equipment out of the well to have the best plug job possible. So then we get into well plugging itself. And so, as I mentioned before, it's all about bringing the right tools to the location. So plug job is more than just the rig itself. We have to do well site preparation. So if the well is out in the middle of a field or if it's in the middle of the woods, we need to clear a spot to be able to fit all of our equipment. Then we're actually doing the clean out of the well. So taking all of the equipment out, if there are obstructions, trying to figure out how to remove those obstructions, whether it's by drilling or physically retrieving things out of the well. We'll have support equipment. And then we will bring in well logging equipment to give us some data on what's going on downhole. And then we will install cement or pump cement down into the well to start the plugging process. And the cement usually takes a couple of days to do. So we will have water on site for mixing that cement. And then we also have equipment on site for waste disposal. The actual plugging of a well, like I said before in the kitchen renovation project analogy, that could take days to weeks. You plan for days, you plan for weeks, and sometimes projects don't go exactly as you want. And they might take a little bit longer. For us at CSR, we are weekday operations only. So we're daylight operations. We're only on Monday to Friday. Like I mentioned before, all of our folks are local. And so they go home on the weekends. They go home at night. So we're not there in the middle of the night making a whole lot of noise. So these are just some pictures from some of our rigs that we have active. On the left-hand side, that is a well that is being plugged in somebody's front yard. So I am standing on a family's front porch looking out. So there could be a lot of equipment that show up. In the middle, what I want to highlight in there, it looks like there is a wooden floor sorts. So this well is in a park near Cleveland, Ohio, and those are composite mats that we use to lay down over soft soil so that we can bring in our heavy equipment and not cause ruts. The beauty of these mats is that when we're done with the job, we lift up the mats and it's a whole lot easier to regrade the surface. We haven't created a whole lot of damage to the soils. And it's a lot easier to restore those soils back into original conditions. And then on the right-hand side, this is a rig that we have active in the woods. We try to clear as small a spot as we possibly can. We try to cause the least amount of interruption to the land use as possible. So just a couple of pictures there. As I mentioned earlier, once we have a well cleaned out, we do log it. So we will send some electronic tools down into the hole to give us some data on how big the hole is, how deep it is, and how what kind of shape the casing and the cement that are currently in the well, what kind of shape they're in. That helps us plan additional steps going forward. So once we're confident that we have a well that's cleaned out and ready to be plugged, then we will bring in our cement units to mix up cement on location and pump it down into the hole. So in this picture, we've got a couple different pieces of equipment. So on the left-hand side, in those cylindrical units, that's dry cement powder. And in the green tank on the right-hand side, there is fresh water. And those will be mixed together in the mixer, which is in the truck in the middle of the picture. And then it will be pumped into the well, which is where that vertical rig is. So I've just put in some arrows. So when we're cementing, we will bring 2 trucks on location and a lot of hoses, and we will actually mix the cement there on location. And we will pump it to the well. So during cementing operations, you'll see a couple of extra vehicles show up on location. So once a well has been plugged from bottom all the way up to the top, and the well has been confirmed to not have any more gas flow or water flow or oil flow from it, we can go ahead with the site restoration process. So during site restoration, after plugging all of the equipment, all of the trucks, all of the mats, everything is removed from location. Any waste generated on location is properly disposed, and that would include tanks and some of the pipes that are associated with the well. The well is then cut off and monumented with a steel plate and an identification number for future reference. It's also surveyed, so then DEP or if it's another regulatory agency would have a record of that location. So in the future, if somebody else wants to drill a well or do something else, that location will be monumented. And then the site is restored to plan. So if you remember, a few minutes ago, we were talking about developing that site restoration plan with the landowner. Now that we're here to the site restoration, that's our work plan to go off of. So we'll do regrading, seeding, mulching. Sometimes if it's in a farmer's field, we're asked just to regrade it and leave it alone, and the farmer will take care of it from there. So it's just a matter of that conversation with the landowner. Generally, the restoration process takes a few days, and we generally keep a project open until vegetation has been documented to be grown, or if there's another stipulation in the site restoration plan that says, okay, this is your mile marker for being done with the project. So I just wanted to show a site restoration example. So you guys have seen this picture on the left before. That's our cement trucks. 2 weeks later, we were completely off of that location and had regraded everything and mulched it. And it, it really didn't look like we were there, except for the brush had been removed. So just wanted to provide my contact information, and these slides will be made available to everybody. So that's my contact information. Got information about CSR's website. We also have a presence on Facebook and LinkedIn. So there's lots of ways to get in touch. And I also included some of the information about the resources available from DEP. So that was my presentation, and I will turn it back over to Dan. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Amanda. That was great. Could stop sharing. Jon Laughner, do you want to share your slides? Well, we're waiting for Jon there, but I did put something in the chat there. There was a question about being responsible if you own your oil and gas rights. Please fact check me on that. As I mentioned, I forgot to get my oil and gas law degree. So, all right.
No, you're right. You're right, Dan. Just that it's not just the surface owner that is can be exempt from well plugging liability. It can be a subsurface rights owner or a royalty interest owner as well.
Okay. So, Jon, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Go ahead, and we'll try to get through Jon and our slides in just a couple minutes so we can get to some really great questions and answers. And Amanda and Bud, if you want to look at the Q&A box, that could be helpful. We might run about 5 minutes late today, folks. So if you can stick around, tell your boss you have something important to do, that would be great.
And I'm going to put Dana on the spot and ask her to bring the slides up, because what we talked about earlier has happened again. So I can't advance. And while we're doing that, if Dana can bring the slides up, thank you. Amanda and Bud, Dan, you did a great job bringing on two experts. I think they've covered a lot of ground, and what we have, I can cover my part rather shortly to get to your part, Dan, that I think is kind of important for folks to hear.
Okay.
If we could get to slide 6, Dana, that'd be a good starting point, I think.
Yeah.
And I would
Jon,
be,
I have.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe Dana has it now.
I would be remiss if we didn't mention that we're participating. Penn State Extension and TOPCORP energy training, which is the oil and gas regulator training that is conducted throughout the U.S. and Canada. A lot of online content. We've got a lot of TOPCORP people here today participating, and this is a partnership between the two today in this presentation. Next. Well, I'm going to buzz through these rather quickly. This is just a map highlighting for all of us that probably already know where the bulk of orphaned and abandoned wells are. Next. Nothing looks similar, and Amanda particularly showed a lot of slides of this. Nothing is typical at all, and you'll see all of this. And those of you who live in northwestern Pennsylvania have all seen some of this. Next. And this. Bud did a great job of giving definitions for these three terms. Next. And these are all recent pictures, by the way, and this is a wood casing that's that's probably 100 years old. And for some firms that might use a drone with a magnetometer, you would never find this. So it's really important for local community members who are and property owners to identify these, because it's probably not going to be identified in any other way. Next. We've got these definitions down. Next. And next. Bud, you did a good job of explaining these, so we're just reiterating some of those terms again. Next. I think that why these can be a problem, and I think they all relate to that first bullet point, safety. I think all those other ones fall underneath safety to some in some way or another. And it's just like any other piece of equipment out in the environment. It's not going to get better. We know it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. So let's take care of it while we can. Next. The safety hazard, this is one example of multiple safety, multiple bad things have happened. And look at the date that this well was drilled in McKean County, 1881, and lost a house as a result of an abandoned well that maybe nobody knew about. Next.
And John, this seems to happen more often. You know, this isn't like a once in a lifetime thing. This seems to happen every year or two, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, good point. And during, I mean, this is something we all learned about water testing, and particularly with some lawsuits across the state, that you can test your water for methane if you think you're in an area where the potential for an abandoned well to be putting something into the aquifer, that can be checked with a defined water test. Next. They all, I'm going to say environment. This is also safety hazard that falls under safety. We just don't need pollution, any type of pollution getting into in streams and water systems. Next. If you do any of these things, it's a real hassle. And if nothing else, it can be dangerous as well, particularly if you're hunting, farming. I know how easy it is to think I can get the last 2 discs of a disc around a post or something, and I snag it. So they're always an impediment. They're always in the way. And it's just, let's just get it out of the way so that you don't have to worry about it, and it's not a safety hazard. Next. I think this has been articulated many times here. It's just not going to get better, and somebody else is going to have to deal with it, and maybe it won't be as easy in the future to deal with it just because it's not going to get better. Next. Don't mess with old wells. I think we've heard that a couple times already too. We don't know. Most people that have done as Bud mentioned, maybe went out and tapped into the old piping, can do that. But most of us who do that probably haven't added an odorant to the gas as a safety precaution. So that's just one of the issues that arises from getting free gas from an old well, and maybe why probably a good reason why you shouldn't. Next. And I'm going to turn this over to Dan. Dan?
Yeah, so you might wonder why this is getting some attention now. There is some money coming from federal and state sources that are really going to allow Pennsylvania to plug a lot more wells. Next, Dana. This has been mentioned, but public safety, environmental harm. I would say this: if you're looking at your property, if you have a leak, that's going to be a high priority. If you're leaking methane, if you're leaking a petroleum product, brine water, any of those kind of things, it's going to be a priority. If it's near residential dwelling and has any of those, it's twice as big. Okay, next. So if we want to identify these things, this is I believe attached to the map. So I wanted to see for my own, look at my neighborhood and see what's on there, how is it listed, and so forth. So we're going to send this out to you as well, and Dana might put it in the chat for us, although she's doing 4 things at once here. But you can get on here and get an easy link straight to that DEP map reporting. Okay, next. This is these are wells on the map, and you can see this is our oil and gas mapping. That DEP website has a lot of links that are very helpful. Now, this one is just showing me my neighborhood, and you can see the how those wells are listed. If I want to look at my own property, I can blow that up and really get a sense of where they're at on there. Okay, next. So the well reporting form, we've had some conversations about this. It's not that hard of a form to fill out, but it does have some trickiness to it. If you're not familiar with how do I get a GPS on my phone, we can walk you through that, how to get that GPS on Google Maps. So it doesn't matter if your iPhone or something else. There are some things in here you may not know. It might be okay to skip them. Probably most of these aren't going to have an API number. That's okay. What we really want to do is document where that well is, any problems it might have, okay? And then get a GPS coordinate on there so that we can get DEP on site to verify or solve any sort of problems. And Dana did put that in the chat if anyone wants to copy that out of there. Next, please, Dana. Okay, so here's the bottom line. I thought, hey, what we should do is help people fill this out. So that email address you see right there goes to me and about 4 or 5 of my colleagues. Some of them are even pretty competent, you know. So if you have questions about any of this, filling out that form or anything else, I want you to click on that, send us your question, and whoever's up next and can answer that question, we'll try to get at that. We work with DEP. We don't work against DEP on this, so we will work with them to make sure that this is that this happens. But we also work for and care for landowners and farmers out there. So we want the best result for you too. Okay. And next. All right. So we're going to jump right into questions, guys. Go ahead and stop sharing there. I'm going to throw a couple questions your way. I don't know if there's anything, if there's any that stand out to you. But this question is kind of paramount, and I think we sort of kind of answered it, but we need to give a full answer. What options do landowners have when there's a leaking oil or gas well on their property? One of you guys want to take that?
I'll answer. Contact us. Let us know. And I thought some of the advice that was given earlier was excellent in terms of, you know, personal safety, stay away. Don't, you know, if you've identified a leak, treat it as an emergency type situation and secure the area if you can, and definitely get in touch with us, and we'll have someone that is trained to handle that and investigate that. Also, and maybe even more importantly, if you know who the operator is, contact them and let them know. They want to know. Personally, I've done this on probably half a dozen occasions. I'd be out hunting and I'd be on a game lands, and I would hear the bubbling and I'd look, and yep, there's the gas supply line connecting the well to the transmission line, and it had heaved or frozen or buckled or who knows what. And so I'd go to the well and get the number of the operator, and that information is often on a tag on the well. Not always. For these wells, maybe not at all. But don't assume it's an abandoned, orphaned, or legacy well. If there's a tag on the well, call the operator, because they'll be interested to know and interested to fix it. But if not, if it's an unidentifiable older legacy well, orphaned or abandoned well, then by all means let us know.
Okay. Amanda, did you have anything to add to that?
Nope, I think Bud's answer was perfect.
Okay. So someone asked if you have a abandoned well on your property, you follow our advice, you go ahead and report, hey, look, this thing isn't on the map, it's abandoned. Are you then responsible or obligated for plugging it? And I answered that, but again, I forgot my law degree. So anybody want to, Bud, you want to tackle that one too?
Assuming that you haven't done anything other than find it and report it, you're right. Now, if you've buried it, dozed it off the wellhead, tapped into it, or tried to produce or any of those things, then obviously you could face some potential liability. But what we're talking about here is the average landowner that finds and reports. No, there's no liability associated with that.
So I really want to pound home this point for folks who might be nervous about calling DEP with something on their property. It doesn't matter if you have a lease on it, right? It doesn't matter if you own it 100%. if you don't own the well and you didn't mess with it, as Jon said, it's not your problem, right?
Except to the extent that it may be a problem for your safety, the environment, and all those other things that we
Yes.
talked about. Yes.
Yeah, great.
No,
point.
you're not
Thank you.
responsible for the plugging costs associated with the well plugging program. And
Yeah.
actually, we don't want people to hesitate, because if you hesitate and we don't know about that well, then it can't get on the plugging list, and you're actually perpetuating a problem, not of your creation. And I will mention too, this question dovetails with another one that was asked, maybe one or more that was asked in the Q&A section. There are a lot of questions about different owners of different slices of the ground, and that's a subject for a whole other seminar about Pennsylvania property law and surface owners and subsurface owners and operators who drill down through all of these layers, and who's responsible and all of those things. I will just tell you that when I use the term landowner in our discussion today, you can also translate that to royalty owner. And what do I mean by that? I mean somebody who may own some of the subsurface slices, who receives royalty income from production there. Those folks, those royalty owners, are not liable for plugging costs associated with the well, as long as they're not responsible for the ownership or maintenance or operation of the actual well.
Yeah.
Like landowners, like surface owners.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make that point, because I know a lot of the questions had some of that element to them.
Great point. So if your Aunt B owns a half an interest in that well, you don't want to get her in trouble. You won't. Okay. Amanda, a couple questions for you. Impossible questions, of course, about well plugging. Will a well need replugged at some point? How long should a plugging job last?
That's a really good question. So the plugs that we are putting in now, we are considering them to be forever plugs. There are wells that we have encountered that were previously plugged using all kinds of alternate materials that are not cement, such as burlap, cannonballs, tree stumps, all kinds of things. And all of those have rotted and have failed. And so we're having to go back in and plug. But there's a lot of science and engineering that's going into developing even better materials, cement additives, resins, all kinds of other materials to be able to put down into a well to secure it for a really, really long time, if not forever.
And so you mentioned the old plugging thing, and we should mention to property owners out there, please put no rock, sticks, etc. Anything down that well makes that job harder for Amanda, makes it more expensive.
Yes.
The question is, again, what type of plugging, if plugged on several wells on my property? I've looked at this where I see this well's listed as plug, 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 plug. You look at them, you go, oh boy, what's there? We don't really know what might have been used, say, 40, 50 years ago, but we can know what the results are today. How do we answer that?
Yes. So, I mean, there is a lot of research that goes into cements now. American Petroleum Institute, some of the other professional organizations that are out there are doing a lot of research into cementing. It seems like within the last 10 years, well plugging, abandonment, and decommissioning has gotten a lot of attention, not only here in Appalachia, but across the nation and across the globe. Well decommissioning has become a very important priority. And so there's a lot of focus on it, a lot of people looking at it.
Okay. Hope no one needs to go anywhere. Another question for you, Amanda. Where and how is the removed equipment disposed after plugging, casing, storage tanks, et cetera, What are you doing with all that stuff?
So all of that material is either scrapped if it can be scrapped. But first of all, it's always scanned to try to figure out, what kind of condition that material is in. If it can be recycled and reused, it is. If it can't, then it's going to a permitted landfill that is specifically designed for that type of waste. So it's not being thrown out on somebody else's property. It's being managed in a permitted way.
Okay. All right, thank you. But I should come back to you with some tricky legal questions. I mean, why do we pay you so much if you're not going to answer tricky legal questions, right?
I was unaware you were paying me. That's good
No,
news.
we're paying you nothing. That was the joke of it. Sorry. In a case where landowner bought a house, abandoned well connected to it, so they don't own the well, didn't connect to it, didn't alter the well themselves, is the landowner responsible?
No, not under those facts, no.
Okay. And if the landowner has liability for a well, are they and they're eligible for DEP grant, is there a required match, cash or in kind?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, okay. So I think the answer is no, but we can get you a definitive answer to that. I do want to get let everyone go for today. I want to remind you again, please sign up for our newsletter. And I think we are in the process of maybe planning our next webinar on this topic. We are looking forward to working with DEP, Amanda, and others on doing some live meetings, maybe in some communities that have oil and gas. Some takeaway points, if each of you are willing to throw one out. Here's mine. Don't mess with these old wells. All right. Don't try to alter them, take the thing off, get free gas, experiment, et cetera, throw rocks down the holes, et cetera, et cetera. Amanda, what's your takeaway?
There are people out there who are really passionate about this and who really want to help. So don't be shy. Reach out.
Yeah.
There's resources out there.
Yeah, don't be afraid to go down this road. You're not going to get in trouble. Bud?
I would echo one of the responses that you gave in the Q&A, where somebody suggested that the advice they received is don't make the evening news, and I would echo that. We don't want anybody to be. I had a landowner one time who was demonstrating to me how they could set their kitchen tap water on fire, and my first bit of advice was don't do that. That's not a good thing. It's a problem that we address, but you don't want to be on the evening news. But also, don't be afraid to come forward. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. We want to work with folks. We want to solve these problems. We're not looking to. We're looking to help, and we're looking to find those wells that need to be prioritized to be plugged sooner rather than later. One of the questions was, are orphaned wells prioritized above abandoned wells, et cetera? It's not about the label associated with the well. It's about the condition of the well and the threat to health, human safety, the environment, and those things. So that's what we're looking to address. And please feel free to come forward and have that conversation.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Jon Laughner, your takeaway for today. John,
I vote with don't mess with them and report them.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Hey, thank you. Really appreciate my Extension Energy team, Matt Svets, Dana Olendyke, Jon Laughner, those who weren't here, including Joe Conklin, Tom Bearsnuck. Really want to thank Amanda Veazey. She is always great for us. And Bud, we've been doing this a long time, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. Thank you very much. We'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.